Here in the Spotify example, what advantage does the user gain by interacting with ChatGPT first and then being referred to Spotify instead of just using ChatGPT directly inside the Spotify app? So really, how should we think about different channels and where intelligence fit within these different channels?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's really a question of where do we want to have that interaction. I think in terms of the Spotify app, what the user could really benefit for is the knowledge that ChatGPT has around artists and similar artists, or like not similar artists, but maybe moods and what artists are relevant and so on. And I think it's difficult for me to come up with a concrete example, but I think the closest I have right now is the example that I gave in the presentation, where we see that I requested songs from Ed and Taylor, and it automatically picked up who I was referencing or referring to. But I think there could be other examples where ChatGPT sort of just realizes what my intent is, and then handles that and creates a suitable playlist.
Yeah.
So I think it's really about ChatGPT pulling in knowledge that Spotify might not have.
Yeah. And I think also back to the example with Walmart, right? You will continuously have to meet your customers within different channels. And they will come to expect the smartness and intelligence that AI provides. And, meeting them in ChatGPT might be the best way to be where the user is. If they start their journey there, you want to meet them there. If they start the journey within your app, great. Provide that intelligence there for them. So I think both are obviously valid.
Yeah.
Let's see. Do you expect any friction between OpenAI reviewing apps for ChatGPT versus Apple reviewing ChatGPT apps for iOS?
Mm-hmm.
In the end, it seems to be an app store inside the App Store.
Yeah.
Right.
I think this is a really interesting question, actually, because there's some truth to it being an app store within the App Store. And I should start by mentioning that OpenAI hasn't fully published their review guidelines yet. So we don't know exactly how that review process is going to look like. But we know there's going to be some process, both in terms of review and in terms of apps being featured. But I think the app within an app store is like a temporary problem, because that only really holds if we're looking into ChatGPT's apps on mobile devices. That doesn't hold for ChatGPT apps running on web, and it doesn't really hold for ChatGPT apps running on OpenAI's own hardware when we see that. So I think the ecosystem is much broader than the app store being inside another app store. But it is an interesting way of looking at it, I think.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we go for another question. What about on-device on the rise? Will ChatGPT support that? I would see the carbon footprint as an issue to just run on the lights. So I guess this is about, having these models run in the cloud. Obviously, it takes a lot of energy versus running on your device, on your phone.
Right.
And right now for ChatGPT, it's all running in the cloud, right?
Right. Yeah, it is. And I think it's a fair question because obviously making a bunch of network calls and running an AI model just for turning on a light, as we saw in the presentation, that might be overkill. But that was more a fun demo that we did within the first 24 hours of this Apps SDK being available. But I think there's much more value in more complex problems, like the ones Booking.com are solving with trip planning and trip booking across different services, and booking your journey, your flight, booking accommodation, and so on. But on-device models are gaining some traction, and other companies are really focusing on that. Apple is focusing on that with their Apple Intelligence. But Apple has also realized that there are some limitations to that, which is why they will start running your query on device, or they will check if it's suitable to be run on device. And if it's not, they will hand it off to the cloud. There are some obvious and some acknowledged problems with running AI on device, and some limitations. And I think it's really about choosing the right tool for your problem. Turning on a light, well, that should probably be an on-device model. Doing a booking flow, that might require a model running in the cloud.
Right. And so when you build your own app, for instance, you control your own channel, then you can make that decision, see which models are available that you can run on device, and where you need to rely on the cloud.
Yeah, and that is like the scene is changing. On-device models is getting better, but they will never be as good as the ones we can run in the cloud.
Right. All right, let's see. One last question here. In your slide, Simon, so let's see, you showed an MCP connected to several services in the backend. How difficult is that vis-a-vis connecting one MCP to one service?
Good question. Honestly, I would say not that much more complicated, not that much more difficult. Of course, there's some overhead in connecting the services, but once you've connected one, connecting the other is sort of similar. It's just different entry, right? So of course it does get a little more complicated, but it's not an issue, and it really comes down to what these MCP servers are. They are quite thin layers on top of your underlying services typically, because all of the heavy lifting, all of the AI is handled by ChatGPT and OpenAI and Anthropic and whatever you're connecting your MCP server to. And then the MCP server is more exposing simple tools. And you should really keep this MCP server and the tools that it exposes as simple as possible. And then expose several tools or really well-defined simple tools, because that is what allows the AI to reason about this toolbox you're exposing and combining the tools to solve complex problems. So in its nature, an MCP server isn't actually that complicated.
All right. All right, let's see. I think we do have time for maybe one or two more questions. So let's see if there are other questions out there. What about SEO of ChatGPT and marketing? How can apps be more discoverable than others? All right, so with SEO, we're used to optimizing, right, for search engines. Right now, there's a growing number of services offering GEO, so generative engine optimization, and that's absolutely something to look into if you haven't started looking into this. You want to make sure that your service, your product is discoverable within ChatGPT and other AI assistants. And if you've done a good job of SEO now, that will help you also reach people within these AI assistants. But there are new ways and obviously new ways of monitoring this and new tips and tricks to take into account here. So do have a look at that. And also I think one interesting thing is, because even though you might be discoverable, we do see that there are less referrals nowadays from both Google and from these other engines to your own site. And I think that apps in ChatGPT is a good way of actually trying to move that traffic, those users, into your own channels, right? You're able to meet them with your brand within ChatGPT. And then, as we've said now numerous times, bring them over into your channel. So something interesting to look at. Privacy and data. We see a couple of questions on that as well. So when you connect your service, or for the user, when they connect your service to ChatGPT, how is data handled between your service and ChatGPT?
Right. So from a technical point of view, the way that it works is that, of course, your MCP server can expose tools that feed data into OpenAI. And you're really, as a company, as a developer, you're really responsible for ensuring that you don't feed it too much data. Now, that's one thing. If we're talking about user data, then the way it works is that the MCP protocol, this open protocol, has been expanded to support OAuth. So that's what's called MCP OAuth, which runs a somewhat straightforward and OAuth flow that we're used to from other services, like when we're signing in with Google or Facebook or Apple or whatever we're doing. And MCP and apps in ChatGPT supports this. And OAuth is built in a way where the user authorizes one service to connect to another. In this case, connecting something like Spotify to ChatGPT. And as part of this OAuth flow, users can control what data is exposed from their account.
Great. All right. So with that, I think I just want to thank you all for joining the webinar. I hope you learned a lot. I hope there's plenty for you to take back home and think about how this affects your brand, your service, your product. Again, I want to recommend that you start thinking about how you meet customers within these different channels, and start identifying what are the use cases that make sense to provide within ChatGPT as an app in ChatGPT, and then start exploring this. And feel free to reach out and read more on Framna.com about how we can support you with this. Again, thank you for attending, and hope to see you in future seminars soon.